Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today I'm here with Natalie Baird-King. Natalie is a board-certified attorney in marital and family law and a Florida Supreme Court certified family law mediator based in Tampa, Florida. Natalie is also the author of Forgiving Unforgivable, The 4 Essential Secrets to Overcome Trauma, Stand Empowered, and Step into Purpose. And this book was catalyzed by something that we'll talk in more detail about today, which is Natalie's own experiences with psychedelics and plant medicine. So Natalie, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's an honor.
So I'd love to start with just kind of creating a context and a lens for our conversation today, which I think is really going to focus a lot on forgiveness and the power of forgiveness. And I would just love to know how your relationship has been with forgiveness, over the last 5, 10, 15 years. What have you learned about forgiveness as you've stepped into this journey with psychedelics and plant medicine and healing some of the early trauma that you experienced while growing up?
So when I started my search, I didn't know what I was looking for. And I actually ended up stumbling upon forgiveness in an ayahuasca journey. It was an amazing experience. I had been drawn to the medicine simply because I was very unhappy in life. I had all these great achievements that I had achieved in my career. I had started a nonprofit for domestic violence victims. I had attained several board certifications, which is, 2% of us lawyers actually have. And I kind of stepped back one day and I'm like, why am I not happy? I've achieved all these things and what's going on? And I fell in and out of depression, on and off medications by Big Pharma. And I go on them and getting off them was even worse. And what ended up happening is that I met up with a friend that I hadn't seen in a long time. And after I saw her, I'm like, boy, has she changed? Because the last time I saw her, we were both in this really, really difficult place. She had gone through a lot of trauma. I was basically raised in a traumatic household where my father was abusive. And she told me about this place in Costa Rica. And she talked to me about ayahuasca. She talked to me a little bit about it. I went to research it. And then I'm like, there's no way I can do this because I'm not into drugs. I don't ever do drugs. The most I had done was I would drown myself in alcohol. But I was not in the drugs, So I went and did all this Google. But something is drawing me back to finding out more about it. And then when she kind of opened up about it, I realized she had completely become this different person. And I remember being raised in this very religious home, very Pentecostal church. And I remember reading in the Bible this passage that said, the peace that passes all understanding that you could have when you meet God. Well, she was like that. And I was like, wow, I don't know how this has helped you, but maybe I should take a chance on it. Maybe I should take a chance. And I will tell you that was over 5 years ago. And that's when my actual journey started. And that's how I actually stumbled upon what I was really searching for, which in my opinion was forgiveness. It changed my life.
And so how do you define forgiveness or how would you communicate the role that forgiveness has played in this journey for you?
So forgiveness is a practice. It's not something that we achieve. It's not a goal that we attain before we leave this earth. It's actually a practice. It's something we have to actually do every day. Whether it's forgiveness for somebody that's hurt us and we work through those and unravel the things as to why we need to forgive them, or self-forgiveness, which in my opinion is always the hardest. But it's an actual practice. And forgiveness is something that we actually do. It's not something we should do, but we do it for ourselves. We don't do it for the perpetrator. We do it just for ourselves. And as a result of us actually finding forgiveness and actually having forgiveness for somebody that's caused us pain, we have a lot of freedom that's given to us because of that. There's a lot of things that happened to me because of it. I actually was able to find my purpose, which is the message of forgiveness. It allowed me to have this inordinate release of blocks, a lot of trauma that I had because of my dad being so abusive growing up. So there was this huge revelation that happened for me due to forgiveness. I always talk about, Lewis Smedes has a quote that talks about hey, forgiveness is one of those things where you basically are the prisoner and then you find out the prisoner is just you. And that's what forgiveness brings, is basically this opening for ourselves and no one else but us.
And I love the point that you made, which is that a lot of this is about self-forgiveness. And it's something I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more. Why is it that the emphasis, because when I think of perpetrators, when I think of trauma, or when I think of people who have done us wrong at some point, what I often think about is, okay, we want to forgive that person. But what I'm hearing you say is it's not necessarily about forgiving that person, because sometimes we can't forgive that person. We can't have that closure because they've passed away, they've died, they're no longer with us. And so what I'm hearing you say is a lot of this was about that sort of path and process of self-forgiveness. Tell us a little bit more about that dynamic, the dynamic of forgiving the perpetrator versus just forgiving yourself. Why is that sense of self-forgiveness so critical as part of this path?
Right. So they're two connected. And I believe my dad has passed this earth. He passed this earth over 13 years ago, and I was able to forget him while he was here on this earth. It took him actually passing this earth for me to actually go searching for what it was that was the void, and that void was basically forgiveness. But I'll tell you a little story that's very impactful about the answer of what you're asking. The day that my dad died, I was a keynote speaker of a big domestic violence shelter here in my area here in Tampa. And it was a luncheon, a fundraiser luncheon. And I was going to out my dad about all the abuse that he had done to us four kids and my mother. And the reason why I'd done that is because my mother had shown up on the doorstep the weekend before yet another episode had happened. And I've been out of the house for over 20 years at this point. And I remember getting ready for the speech, and then my mother called. And she called my former husband at the time. He was my husband at the time, but he's my former husband. And she said, "Can you go check on Richard?" Because she was visiting my sister in North Carolina with my nieces. And what happened was she had this gut feeling something had happened to my father. So my husband couldn't join me for the keynote. He left to go check on him. I go walk over to the venue, and I'm furious. Yet he has now ruined another important time in my life, something that I had to work very hard to actually go and speak about. And I was actually going to speak about him. And here he goes and ruins it because he won't answer anybody's calls. And so I'm walking over to the venue, and I thought, he's probably just drunk on the back porch like he always is by noon. And, I just wish he was dead. I just wish he would just go, because we had all sustained the abuse, and it was enough. I was at that point that this is enough. So I arrive at the venue, and I'm getting ready to take the stage, and one of my friends comes over and says, hey, Natalie, Corey's calling you, my former husband. He needs to speak to you. It's important. So I knew at that point something had happened. And I grabbed the phone. I'm like, hey, I'm about to take the stage. They're micing me up. And he's like, Natalie, I'm so sorry, but your dad's passed away. I never took the stage that day. And from that moment forward, for quite some time, I thought I killed him with my thought. And so what happened is that there was this basically huge, void in my life. The man that abused me, the first man that I thought loved me, the man that abused me has left this earth. There's not been reconciliation that ever happened. And then I killed him with my thought. Mm. So the part of self-forgiveness is that it's so much easier sometimes to forgive somebody else than it is to forgive ourselves. Because I had to come to the conclusion, number one, I didn't kill him with my thought. And number two is that I'm worthy of forgiveness. I was in a place in that moment, and when I look back at that place in that moment, I was a very, very hurt 40-year-old. Mm. And that young 40-year-old that was thriving in her career was in a very hurt place. And in a moment of desperation and pain and suffering, she did wish her father to be dead. Mm. But I have a lot of compassion for her, and compassion is the beginning of forgiveness, self-forgiveness, importantly. Because without compassion, we can't really see ourselves and look back as an observer and say, you know what, she was in a really hard place, but she's worthy to forgive herself.
And so how is it that ayahuasca then, in your work and going to Costa Rica and starting to explore that as a medicine, how did ayahuasca really help to facilitate that deep process of self-forgiveness? What awareness did it bring to you? What insight did it bring to you? What support did it bring to you in that process of forgiveness?
So I'll tell you, walking into the plant medicine was very difficult for me. Type A personality, I'm an attorney, I've got that legal side of the brain. Everything has to make sense. It's got to be evident. It's got to be proof. It's got to be shown to me, right? That's the world that I live in on a daily basis in my career. So when I walked into medicine, as many of us know that have been in the plant medicine community and ceremonies and, communed with this sacrament, I didn't surrender very well. I fought it, and it was tough. It was really, really tough. But at some point, it was the third ceremony, I said, you know what? I'm here to change. And I've got a choice. I can leave or I can go back a different person. So which choice am I going to change today in this ceremony at this moment? And so I decided I'm going in, I'm going all in. And I'm just going to let the medicine take me where it's going to take me. When I finally dropped into the medicine, as we know, that feeling where it comes over your body almost as if water is being poured on my body. That's what it feels like. I remember seeing this woman. And to this day, I know she's my guide because I've seen her multiple times in multiple ceremonies. And in my meditation, she even comes. And she comes and she says, do you want to see something? And I said, sure, I'd love to. So I fly out of my body. I'm with her. We fly into this celestial. There's stars, planets, galaxies everywhere. And all of a sudden we arrived at this place. And I'm going to call this place heaven because I've been to heaven many, many times, not only on this earth, but within my journeys. And we arrive and it's beautiful. There's a lavender field. There's this gorgeous body of water. There's a mountainscape. And then there's this dock and there's a boat actually docked right there. And so we actually fly. I want to say fly or float, whatever you want to call it. And we get to the edge of this dock. And I look at the boat, it's a huge sailboat. And my dad loved sailboats. He wanted to build one when he was on this earth, but he never got that opportunity. So we arrived on this dock, and I saw a man on this boat. And at this point, I didn't know what was going on other than I'm outside of my body. I could see myself down in the Maloka. But I'm on this dock with this woman that's gorgeous. And all of a sudden, I see the man step on the dock. And then he looks at me and he starts running toward me. He has a white t-shirt on and like white pants or like shorts. And he starts running toward me. And I knew halfway that he got to me, it was my dad. And my dad was very recognizable. He had a beard and he had glasses and he looked the same that he did on this earth, but he looks extremely healthy and fit. And so he basically ran to me and he just like embraced me. And I remember that moment because in my body on the mat, my entire body had electricity running through it and it bowed up. Like my whole body actually bowed up. But it was this beautiful feeling. It didn't hurt. It just was this electricity, like this energy that went through my body when he hugged me. And I remember after he embraced me, what seemed like days, right? Because there is no time in that world. I remember him, stepping back a little bit, saying, "I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you can forgive me for all the things I've done." And I said, "Dad, I've already forgiven you. Can you forgive me?" And he said, "There is never anything to forgive." And that's what happened in that night. And I came out of that journey and I was like, whoa, what happened here? But I was changed permanently, not for just a day or a week or a month or even just a year. I was changed permanently in that moment. And that 6-hour journey that I had was changed permanently.
Wow. Yeah, and that's the power of these medicines, that they can open up a space that can impact us for the rest of our lives. And it sounds like that's what happened with you. You know, that deep level of forgiveness that you were able to access and turn inwards. I mean, how did you change then as a result? How, you leave the ayahuasca center in Costa Rica, you come back home. What are some aspects of your life that you notice began to shift and change as a result of this journey that you've gone through?
Yeah, the integration part sometimes is the hardest, right? After we come out of something like that, because it's almost like the cells in your body need to catch up with what basically you just experienced, right? So the integration part is, to me, one of the most important pieces of our plant medicine journeys. But one of the things that I noticed a huge change is I would turn to alcohol a lot, just to decompress, to disengage, to relax. I had no desire to actually drink, get near it, get around it. And I always thought like alcohol was this way to separate my day. So I'd have a really hard mediation or a hard day with my legal practice. And then I would go home and, here I am. I'm like, ugh, I just need a martini. Just give me a martini. Right. And so then I would think it would relax me so that I can separate my day. But what happened would I would just be disengaged with my family. I would drink and then I would just either fall asleep or get angry and there would be a fight. So I noticed that I didn't want any part of that. And, since this time, I feel like alcohol for me is very low vibration. So not that I don't ever drink. I have a glass of wine here and there with nice dinners, but I don't go and do the 2 martinis a night and a bottle of wine like I was doing. So that's one thing that changed substantially. Since that day, I mean, I've not been on any depression medication, nor have I actually felt depressed. So there's a big difference between feeling sad and depression, right? So since that day, what changed like permanently for me is that I just never had that depression feeling, never had to go on any type of big pharma, which I would not go on again after doing this experience. But I didn't have any of those feelings again.
How long had those feelings been around for you?
But probably since I was 16. And they
Oh,
would come
wow.
in waves. So I would get depressed and then I wouldn't know what was wrong. I would go to a doctor. They would do all the blood work and then basically get on the depression medication, usually for a year, sometimes 18 months. And then we would wean off, which was horrible, horrific, right? And then I'd go to another 5 to 6 years, and then that would happen again and again and again. Another change that I can tell you is that I've been able to release a lot of what I consider blocks, trapped emotion. There's times in my life where I would just like be explosively angry and I didn't know why. Like, what's going on? Didn't happen any longer. Did I get angry? Yes, I did. Anger is an emotion that we all have as human beings, right? But it wasn't that explosive anger that was just off the chart. Not understanding, like, my daughter would spill something and I would go crazy, nuts, explosively, anger, That didn't happen anymore. That did not happen anymore. So
Wow.
those are some of the few changes.
And I'm curious, as a professional mediator, you've been in the legal world for a very long time. The work that you do, it sounds like it's not always easy. It's not like you're just behind a desk, checking things off or writing out certain documents. You're up there and you're in conversation and you're at the court. How did your work with this plant medicine, with ayahuasca, impact the way that you were able to show up professionally in the legal field as well? What did you notice maybe shifted and changed as a result of some of the inner work that you were doing, and how that supported even your professional work?
So family law is one of those areas of law that is very hard. I always call people that are going through a family law case, it's like you have really good people, but they're at their worst, like complete
Mm,
worst.
mm,
And like criminal people are like probably not that great of people, and they're at their best in a criminal case because they're underneath this microscope. But in family law, it's the opposite of that. And mental illness comes out with a lot of people. And I can tell you that I deal with people that are extremely in this very dark space in their life. They're usually a lot of fear. Financial fear is probably the biggest. They felt betrayed. There's a lack of trust with the other person. They're having to start their life over sometimes. Don't know what that's going to look like. There's a lot of anxiety. So before I did ayahuasca, these people would come in and I would get extremely frustrated. I'm like, look, that doesn't matter to the court. Who cares about your ex cheating on you or soon to be ex cheating on you. The court doesn't matter. In Florida, we're a no fault state. It doesn't matter. You need to get over it. Right. That's how I'd respond. I would never get through to anybody, even though I know that's what the law is. But, there was a lack of compassion. Right. And so since ayahuasca, I can tell you, I'm an empathetic person. So there is empathy, right? But not taking on their energy. So that's one thing I've had to learn. And more compassion. And there's times where I have people come in and they start calling me names and telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. And they tell me that they got their Google Juris Doctorate, that on Google, right? And what the law is, and, I've done a very, spent a lot of my time trying to know the law extremely well. So when I walk into the process, I'm fully aware of, what a judge may or may not do. So, that's always frustrating. Somebody tells you you don't know what you're talking about. This is what the law is. I had one just the other day. And, at that point you're like, I can see where you're probably getting your information. But it sounds like, your attorney's telling you exactly what I'm telling you, that this judge is not going to do that. And I want you to step back and think about those risks. So the way that I approach it is more from a compassionate way and allowing them to see maybe their risk and letting them understand that this is just a small smidget of time in your life and you can move past this chapter and heal, but you can't move past until we get through this process, right? And end the litigation of your case. So bringing more of the opportunity, I call it my mediation container, right? Because when I'm doing this, I'm trying to get them to get outside of that place of fear, that place of frustration, that place of resentment, and say, hey, how can I work on myself and get through this so that I can start healing? So I come from a different approach other than you just need to get your case done. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of money. That's where I was before. Whereas this is like, do you want to heal? Because if you can settle your case, you can start your healing journey. You really can, and focus on yourself.
Do you then tell them to go to Costa Rica and
a lot of the
like maybe book a trip as well,
Yeah, I in my backdrop every day, I have my book behind me, and a lot of people ask, what is that? And I that gives me an opportunity to open up. What's a book? I wrote about Forgiving Unforgivable, and a lot of people were saying, what it's about. I'm like, well, I got a divorce, and then I ended up going to Costa Rica, and it changed my life. And then just depending on how this person may be, whether they're receiving as well, I may say ayahuasca or not. But I just did a retreat for 15 ladies last weekend, and it was a mindfulness consciousness retreat. That's what I spend all my time not doing mediations on. And, there's 3 people that were a part of that retreat that are wanting to explore plant medicine. And I'm excited for them because they're really trying to get through some trauma that they can't release from the past. And so sometimes it's the right fit for people, maybe not for everybody. There's lots of different modalities, right? MDMA I did as well, and I learned a lot of things that I just couldn't see. And there was no fear with that medicine, which was beautiful, because ayahuasca, for me, it's really about me walking and facing my fears, but understanding that I can love my fears at the same time and embrace them, which is hard, but I'm learning. I had my 30th ceremony last November, and it was probably one of my most profound ceremonies, and it was about fear. And I got to walk through that, but boy, that was an honor to actually do. As hard as it was really an honor for me. I feel blessed. I'm grateful to Mama Ayahuasca because I was able to see something I couldn't see before. That's the greatest thing about the medicine is it's like an onion, right? It's just a constant unlayering. And but before I leave this earth, I try to take the mat maybe once a year. Last year I took it 3 times. I was called to go, but I just never want to stop learning. I just want to I want to know more and more about consciousness. I want to know how I can get to what they call the cetic, right? Like I've done a study on gene keys, and, I want to know how to get to that highest state of being, like highest state of consciousness, right? And plant medicine has been able to open those doors for me.
For you as a lawyer, I'm curious, because you are a mediator, you're in active practice, you wrote this book, Forgiving Unforgivable, all about your own path, and you're outspoken, even prior to starting the podcast, I asked you if there was anything off limits, and you said basically nothing off limits. The question I want to ask is something like, what work did ayahuasca bring you through that allowed you to step out in this way and even be open about this as a lawyer? Because I can imagine that in and of itself wasn't an easy decision to be public and open about your own medicine work, considering your main way of earning an income and making a living in today's world. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about that tension.
Yeah, I can tell you the journey of writing the book was very difficult for me. To be that vulnerable and open about my experience and also about my past, because not many people in the legal world knew that about me. I mean, they knew I'm this high achieving, great family law attorney and great mediator, but they didn't know the behind the scenes, about the depression. They didn't know about the alcoholism that I was dependent upon, failed marriages because of alcohol, right? The trauma that I was raised in. A lot of them didn't know that. So the journey of writing the book was extremely hard. It took me, I had been writing the book prior to ayahuasca, but I didn't know I was writing on forgiveness. So it took me about 3 years after my first ceremony with ayahuasca to finally get it into what I consider a place in order that I feel was able to be published. I think the most difficult thing when you're in a career similar to mine, and this is not everybody because different careers are different for everybody, but in the world that I live in, people are persecuted and prosecuted for Schedule 1 drugs, which ayahuasca is actually a Schedule 1 drug, both federally and in the state of Florida. And so putting myself out there and being that vulnerable about that I took this, what they label as a Schedule 1 drug, and turning it into more of an educational piece to let people know this was a sacrament. And I used this more for religious reasons because I wanted to commune with God. I was tired of living in this space that I was living in. And I wanted to know if my dad was in heaven, if he talked about God all the time, but I'm like, there is no God. I mean, I was in that place. I didn't know, I want to know the truth. I want to find the truth, my truth. I can tell you there's people that probably have not received my message very well. And those are not the people I'm trying to reach. But I can tell you I've had an overwhelming positive response to not only the book, but the message of forgiveness and finding it through ayahuasca. One of the greatest things that just happened this past year is the Aaron Rodgers Netflix series on segment 2, and him talking about it. It's coming up more and more. And the other thing is, and I'm not trying to get political here, but we've got RFK saying they're talking about how ayahuasca changed his son's life and unbelievable change of his son. His son was basically going to probably end up committing suicide. And as a result of ayahuasca, this kid, his kid, he's a man now, but he turns his whole life around. So we have it in what I consider the federal government, but we have it also in mainstream media. And so I guess for me, coming out and talking about this, having the career that I feel kind of blessed because it's not as tainted, because I mean, I was born in the late 60s. Last year, so I'll tell you, I was born in 1969. But, we always thought that, LSD and, all those psychedelic cannabis, everything, that was just drugs, right? We didn't understand what we know today as the healing qualities and the miracles that actually happen with some of these plant medicines and how it changes people on a permanent basis. And especially people that are dealing with some mentally challenging, even mental illness. But, for me, I was mentally challenged with, turning alcohol, which was addiction, and depression. So I can tell you, I came to this place in my life that I'm like, I don't care what people think. And maybe it's because I'm in my mid 50s. You know, they always say women like come to this, Mel Robbins talks about all the time. You know, you come to this place in your life and you're like, I really don't give a flying, you know what, about what people think. And I got to this place, I'm like, am I here about what people think, or am I here actually to give a message to show people my light so that other people could heal? And when I focused in on that, I just didn't care about the naysayers. I just didn't care. And but it was, you know, that in and of itself was a journey, because I had to find the self-worth and self-confidence to say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And in your book, you talk about something called the hope model. And we haven't brought it up yet, but I'd love for you to elaborate on the hope model. What is the hope model, and how did you apply it? You've talked about it already, but how did you apply it to your own life to support you in your healing journey?
So yeah, when I started writing the book, I had to like retrace the steps. Like, how did I actually incorporate it? Like, how did I utilize it? How did I get there? Right. And can people get there without ayahuasca? Right. For me, it was a catalyst. And of course, you know, you guys Psychedelic Podcast. So, you know, it is a catalyst. But I actually went back and I retraced my steps as to kind of how I did it. Right. And ayahuasca was the catalyst for letting me see the 4 steps. So the 4 steps, I came up with the acronym of HOPE, which I love, right? HOPE. And so the first step is harken back. So we got to harken back and recall the memory of the past. So if we can sit and we can remember, I had to remember one scene. This was a scene, and this came up 2 days prior that week that I did ayahuasca. I remember sitting in a closet. My dad came home. He took his belt off. He shoved my mother in their bedroom. And he started beating her with a belt. And I was about 5. And my sister was really young. She was like 2.5. And I pulled her in the closet. We sat in that closet. It was dark. And we sat there. It seemed like hours, right? To a young kid, it may have been 15 minutes. But for me, it just seemed like hours. And I remember sitting there like, he's going to kill her. He's going to kill her. And then he's going to kill us. And I don't know how long it was before we came out, but as a young girl, I remember that moment, right? And so when I say harken back, we got to sometimes, as a curious observer, go back to that closet. We got to remember what we were feeling at that moment in time. And that's the second step. We got to open our heart. We got to feel the emotion. So what I was feeling in that closet was I was feeling fear. And then I fear eventually in my life turned to anger. Right? So I had to feel that I was scared, very fearful little girl. P is for proclaim. I had to proclaim that forgiveness was for me. Right? It's not for anybody else. It's not for the perpetrator. It was only for me. It wasn't for my dad. Forgiveness was not for my dad. It was for me, because it unleashed the opportunities for me. It allowed me to step into my purpose. I became free of all that anger, all that fear. I became free. And then E is to experience that freedom, to live your life. What is it that you will dream of? What is it that you want to do in your life to make a difference? How do you shine your light? And you take that. And that's what actually forgiveness can bring that experience. So that's the hope model.
Hark back, open your heart, proclaim forgiveness, and experience freedom.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that. And it's easy. Hope is such a relevant acronym for someone who is going through this process of forgiving the unforgivable, because oftentimes, and, you know, I feel fortunate where, I mean, I have my small T traumas. There were things that had happened in my upbringing that certainly weren't pleasant, like so many of us, but I feel very grateful that I wasn't exposed necessarily to unforgivable things, but there were many people I know who have been, and many people that I've met along this path and working with psychedelics. And I think the one thing that we all and they all and all of us share in common is hope creates a willingness for a better future, this recognition that something lies beyond. And so I think to have that as the acronym, harken back. Hold on, I'm gonna say it once more. Harken back, hark back, open your heart, proclaim forgiveness, and experience freedom. And that hope model is like Natalie's been talking about, was so helpful for her and her own practice. And so it's been really beautiful to hear you talk about that, at length. Now, there was one other aspect that I wanted to weave in, which is, it's a bit of a left field tangent, but I have to ask you. Your father-in-law was Larry King, which I would assume all of our listeners have heard of. Larry passed away a few years ago, but he was, the man in many respects. Having had quite a few interactions with him and learned some things from him, what impact did he have on your life and your trajectory? And what was sort of the nature of that relationship, and how it impacted you?
Yeah, so I grew up watching him with my grandmother, right? So, and then in 2017 is when I met my current husband, Larry King Jr. And so when we met, I'll never forget, it was a couple of weeks after we met, his father was in town. He's like, "Hey, I want you to meet my dad." And I was like, "Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not sure if I'm prepared for this." Knowing who he was. And then of course, I'm newly dating, his son. So I remember, and I met him, one night, and it was right around Christmas. And, he was here around that time. And I remember, he started asking me questions like, "What do you do?" And, all Larry King style. And 20 minutes into it, I mean, I'm being interviewed by Larry King, right? So I'm being interviewed by him. But that was the spark of a very, very beautiful connection. He inspired me so much. I remember talking to him about, this piece of work that I had done, and I was writing it, but I didn't know how I was going to, put it on paper. I'd actually written a different version of this. I actually called it the 21-day divorce, right? So I wrote a different version of some of my experiences. But I was going a different way. And I remember he so inspired me. He's like, "Natalie, you just need to get it out there. You just need to get it out there. You don't need to worry about what other people think, whether you're going to get a bad Google review or whatever. You just got to get it out there. Just talk about it, get it out, get the message out." And he connected me with his writer, who's Cal Fussman. I was on his podcast about a year and a half ago. Okay. Yeah. So, and Cal was his ghostwriter. So for all of his books, believe it or not. And so, I remember being connected with him, and he's like, "You know what? This is how you got to do it. You got to get a stack of index cards." And that's how I started with the book. And then basically from there, I was able to actually streamline it into an organization that flowed, which is where I got it published. But Larry Sr. was one of my most loved, and his passing was very hard, because I didn't get that much time with him. He passed away in 2021, and I didn't get that much time with him. And I grew up watching him with my grandmother, and I wanted more time. But I'll tell you something about plant medicines. He's come to me multiple times from the other side. And that's what the most unbelievable thing about psychedelics, and for me, ayahuasca is probably my first love, if you will. But I mean, he's come to me and given me messages. He's given me titles. He gave me the title to my second book. It's called Accepting Unacceptable. And it's basically going to be solely on self-forgiveness. I've written it. It's in the editing stage. I hope to have it out by summer. So, wow. I mean, he's come to me. It's the inspiration still continuing. It's just doing it through the spiritual realm versus through the physical 3D world that we live in. But he was an unbelievable man and a true inspiration for me, to actually get the courage, to share the message. So,
well, yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit about that. He's a giant in many ways. His passing was, he lived a long, good life, but nonetheless, his passing was substantial and significant. And I look, as someone who does a lot of interviews myself, I've watched more than a few of his interviews to learn about,
Yeah.
how he did it and what he did. And he was a master at it. So it's cool that you got to at least spend a little bit of time with him. And I think it's fun that your husband is Larry King Jr.
Hmm.
That's quite a,
He's a great man. He's very much like his dad in
yeah.
many, many ways. Their mannerisms. Yeah. It's funny how I like watch him. I'm like, oh my God, he looks just like
Uh,
his dad at this moment in
yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's too fun. So, Forgiving Unforgivable, you have your second book coming out, which is Accepting the Unacceptable or Accepting Unacceptable, which will be published midsummer. So you're a mediator, you do medicine work. It sounds like you're leading retreats. What other things are you up to that are, like what are you excited about right now? What activates you? What really brings you a lot of joy and energy and vitality just in your day to day or week to week existence at this point in time?
Yeah, so my meditation practice I love. That's something that I do every day. I am a big, big I love Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've done about 6 of his retreats. My sister actually works for him now. We went to our first retreat almost 6 years ago, and I remember her walking out of that retreat saying, I'm going to work for him one day. And of course, 3 years ago, she got to work in his space, and she's a nurse for him. So he's unbelievable. But that meditation practice is really basically honing in on that skill so that I can get to that space. And that space for me allows a lot of creation. It allows a lot of calm, tranquility, inner peace. So that's something that I do on a daily basis. Another thing I do is I volunteer ayahuasca retreats. The place that I first went to was Rhythmia down in Costa Rica, Rhythmia Life Advancement Center, and I get to volunteer there a couple times a year, and I love it.
Oh,
It
fun.
is it is so rewarding to be on the other side of the mat, helping others, people heal. And there's a church in Florida here too that I sometimes help as well. So just
Soul
being
Quest? Is that Soul
no,
Quest?
Silquest
Oh,
closed, but Sacred Sanctuary is the other one.
oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
um, but so that's another. It's just volunteering in the space that I so much love. And then I think one of the things I think is really hard for everyone is really understanding self care. You
Mm.
know, um, I'm one of those very driven people, but sitting and having a rest day, right? Having that self care, whether it's a long walk or just sitting in nature for me, or going to the JW Marriott to do a spa day, which I love. But doing something for self care because it's really rejuvenating. It really helps us basically center ourselves and then come back to the rat race of life, right? That we're going to say, okay, it's not going to be a rat race today, but having that rest day. That's really, really important. So those are the things that I truly love. And of course, writing and doing all that. I do a lot of coaching as well, one-on-one coaching and group
Oh,
coaching.
great.
So I really truly enjoy helping people along their healing path and like helping them see like it's all within them, right? How do you just tap in to get there? So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, and I just recently started doing some, believe it or not, corporate workshops. I did
Mm.
a law firm about a week and a half ago, and I just did a consciousness workshop about how mindfulness and how we can balance the scales and bring it to the legal practice. And it was so well received. So just creating these opportunities to go talk about it. And I talk about ayahuasca every time I go. I don't care what people
Nice.
think. I just go and say it. So I've got another law firm that's lined up. And I've actually been approached by a group of judges. So I hope to go in and talk
Oh,
to them as
wow.
well. So, just the inspiration behind all of it is just getting the message out, right? And I that's the stuff that I do, and I really truly enjoy it. And doing podcasts like this, I love talking about it. Love talking about it, and I hope your listeners, any listeners that are considering plant medicine, or do it. Just do it. Go do it. Find a safe place. Just do it. Right? Yeah. Have the
Life
courage.
changing.
It
Yeah, it
is.
is it's a courage thing, and we with Third Wave as a platform, we have a directory. We refer people to certain retreats and clinics, and maybe coaches and practitioners. We also have our own training program. We train coaches and practitioners on how to work with psychedelics, prep and integration, assessment, microdosing, facilitation. And I think that is often the key. Is the psychedelic is important, but it's also equally important who you do it with or where you do it, because that can make
Absolutely.
all the difference.
I
You know.
can. It absolutely can. I mean, you've heard of some horror stories out there. We're not going to focus on that, but
Right.
having the place that you feel safe and that you feel well taken care of and that somebody's holding space in a very positive, energetic light. Yeah, for sure. I've only had those experiences, so I'm very fortunate that, I've had these beautiful experiences because of it. So
it's beautiful. Well, folks, check out Natalie's new book, Forgiving Unforgivable. On Amazon is probably the easiest place to get it. We'll drop a link in the show notes. You can also find out more about Natalie's work at nataliebairdmediations.com. I believe you also have a website specific to the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, Paul, it's forgivingunforgivable.com. That's the best place to reach out. And then if you basically just fill in your information, and if you want to contact me, you can send me a message as well.
Great. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your story, for being so open, for navigating and having the courage to go through what you've gone through, for forgiving yourself and now sharing your light with others. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And I'm just so grateful for what you're doing in the world and the light of consciousness that you're bringing into all of the aspects and areas that you're participating in. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Paul. It was my pleasure as well. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to grow your own medicine from microdosing or high-dose experiences, check out our Mushroom Grow Kit. It's the simplest way to get a reliable source of high-quality mushrooms, and it includes detailed videos walking you through the entire process. No guessing, just clear instructions for best results. Check out the link in the description below.